Hey guys, it's JP. In the last few years, I've secured over 403,000 in 0% business credit for my own online business, but I've also helped clients secure millions in 0% interest credit. And if I had to go from 0 to 150,000 as quickly as humanly possible, I've broken it down into the four steps I would take and the three banks that I would apply for to get there as quickly as humanly possible. After running hundreds of applications for not only myself, family members, clients, I've brought it down to these three banks because these are banks that I think, as far as I know, serve every single state in the United States. So this is going to apply to everyone essentially in the United States that wants to get 0% credit for their business. So like I said, I'm going to break down the four steps and then I'm going to talk about the three banks, and I will also add the exact cards I currently would apply for at those banks to get there as quickly as humanly possible. So step number one, if I was starting completely fresh, I don't have anything that I have now, the first thing I'm going to do, and this is the first thing I recommend everyone does, no matter how far along they are, is you have to optimize your personal credit score. So the goal when getting 0% business credit is to not only just secure it, but you also want to secure it without having to provide proof of income. Because if you're going to have to provide proof of income, you're going to have to show a lot of revenue. Banks will typically lend 10% of a business's revenue. So if you wanted 100K and funding, not even 0% credit necessarily, just funding in general, you're going to have to show at least $1 million in revenue if you want 100K in funding. So our goal with this is, or my goal always, is to get approved for the funding without having to provide any proof of income. And all of the funding that I have personally got and all of the funding that I have gotten for clients, millions of dollars worth, it's all been secured without having to provide single proof of income. So the number one thing, and really the key to make this happen, is optimizing your personal credit report. So there are a lot of different items and a lot of different things that go into optimizing a credit report. So I'm not going to go into every single minute detail because this would be a 45-minute video. So I'm going to break it down first, just the most important items that I see that usually make up a high score. Because when you're applying for 0% funding at banks, you generally need to have at least a 720 plus score. And when I have seen people with these certain credit cards and such credit lines on their report, I've noticed that they're almost always above 720. So the way I like to look at optimizing a personal credit report is there's going to be a bunch of different factors, but the most important is, do you have comparable credit? Now, what's comparable credit? Well, if you have one personal credit card, you have no auto loan, you have no home loan, you have no student loans, you only have one credit line reporting on your report. And let's say that credit card has a $3,000 limit on it. Well, if you go to apply for business funding and you're looking for, 50K on one single card, there's a very low likelihood that they are going to give that to you just based off of comparable credit lines. Because when they're looking at your report, remember, we're not providing any revenue for them to base the approval off of. We're trying to get the approval to go through with just simply them looking at our credit score or our credit report. So if you have one credit card that has a $3,000 limit and you were asking them for a 50K card, they're just simply not going to approve it, because even if your score is above 720, because when they're looking at your credit report, you don't have comparable credit lines. It's just, you have the one card with a $3,000 limit. So they're going to be a little bit skeptical of giving you that much money because they don't know if you can handle it. So what I have noticed is the people who have the most credit lines are the people who look the most credible to the banks, and your score will tend to be higher. So if you have someone who has one credit card, like I just mentioned, and nothing else, there's a very low likelihood you're going to get approved. Or if you do get approved, you're going to get approved for a super small amount. So I like to see people have, at the very, very least, 3 personal credit cards, with one having a credit limit of 10,000 and above. If you have at least that on your report and you're above a 720, there's a good chance you're going to get approved for funding. Now, if you have 3 to 5 credit cards, you have an auto loan, you have a home loan, that you are going to look a lot more credible, and there's a good chance that you're going to get approved for more. It's going to be pretty much guaranteed. But at the very, very least, if I was starting from zero and I was trying to optimize my credit report, I would get up to 3 personal credit cards as quickly as I possibly could. Now, here's the caveat to that. If you right now, or if I right now have 1 credit card, I would not go apply for 2 more credit cards within 5 days of each other, and then 2 weeks from now immediately go apply for business funding. It's not going to work out very well because of how quickly I'm applying for those accounts. If I apply for 2 credit cards and then I immediately go apply for a $50K card at a bank, it's just simply not going to work out very well because it looks like I'm kind of desperate for money. I just applied for a card. 5 days later, I applied for another card. And then let's say 2 weeks after that, I go apply for business funding. That's just too many applications in too short of time. They're going to see the new accounts, and they're going to, most likely, it's going to go into a review, and they're going to ask you about this. So why have you been applying for so much credit? And that's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want to have to get on the phone, negotiate. We want to try to get these approvals to go through without them asking any questions. On top of just making sure you have comparable credit lines, you also need to make sure you have strong credit age. So credit age is just, it takes the average age of your accounts, and that's how it bases your age. So if you got a credit card 5 years ago, and then you got a new credit card, let's say 5 years ago, and then you got a new credit card last week. Well, that's going to make your average credit age around 2.5 years because one of your accounts is 5 years old and one of your accounts is brand new. So the average credit age is going to be right there in the middle at 2.5 years. I like to see credit age around 2 to 2.5, like around that 2 to 3 year mark is really, really good. So if you don't, let's say that I'm just starting out, I got my first credit card a year ago. Well, obviously I'm not going to have 2 years of credit age because I just got my first card a year ago. So it'd be impossible. The way to get around this, and the best way to do this, is to become an authorized user on someone else's card. So for instance, whenever I'm trying to beef up my credit age, and when I was trying to do this a couple years ago, the person that I went and asked was my dad, because my dad had credit cards for 20, 30 years now. So for me to beef up my credit age, I could just become an authorized user on his credit card, and now I get to partake in his credit age. So if I have a card that's a year old, my credit age is only a year old, but his is 25, 30 years old. If I become an authorized user on his card, that's going to give me part of his credit age, and that's going to take me up to where I need to be, which is 2 years plus in credit age. That's the easiest way to go about that if you don't already naturally have the credit age. The next thing would be inquiries. If you have been applying for a bunch of stuff, if you just applied for credit cards, if you just applied for an auto loan, you just applied for a mortgage loan, if you've been applying for a bunch of stuff, you're going to need to either get those hard inquiries on your credit removed before applying, or you're going to have to just wait to let them get a little bit older. If you have, you have the 3 bureaus, you have Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. Banks are going to pull from these different bureaus, and I have found that if you have 2 or more inquiries within the past 6 months and you go to apply for business funding, the approvals usually, sometimes you're just going to straight up get denied because they think you've been applying for too much credit. But I usually recommend that if you have 2 or more recent inquiries within the past 6 months, then you need to get those either removed, or you need to just let them age a little bit. Maybe get them let them go to closer to 1 year, or you just wait until they get past the 6-month mark. Every time that I've worked with someone and they had 2 within the past 6 months on each bureau, whenever the bank pulled that bureau for the credit card, the approvals, it was honestly a 50-50 gamble. So I would 100%, if I was trying to get there as quickly as I possibly could, would figure out the inquiry situation. If I didn't want to wait for them to age, I would have them removed, and that would speed up the process that way. And yeah, so off the top of my head at the moment, that's pretty much what I would recommend if I was optimizing my report as fast as possible. The second thing, actually, I'm sorry, I missed a very, very important thing here. If I had one credit card and my goal was to get business funding as quickly as possible, whenever I'm getting these personal credit cards, I would not just get a random card. I would not go to Home Depot and get just a random credit card, or if I'm not planning on applying, or just go get a random Capital One card, I would figure out what banks I'm about to apply for, and I would get credit cards based off those banks. For instance, if I'm planning to apply for business funding at American Express, then I would get an American Express personal credit card. And then whenever if I'm planning on applying for Chase, I would get a Chase personal credit card. And the reason for that is banks like relationships with, like, if you're just coming in, you've never had any personal accounts with them, you 100% can get approved for 0% credit. But if you are able to get personal credit cards with them first, spend on them, pay them down, and just build a tiny bit of relationships, it's going to help with approvals, especially at American Express. I've noticed that approvals will sometimes be twice as much at American Express if you've had a personal credit card with them first before applying for 0% business funding. So it is very beneficial to figure out what banks you want to apply for, and then get personal credit cards based off of those banks. So I would get, like I said, if I had one card, I would make sure I get an American Express card, I would make sure I get a Chase card, and then I would just get personal credit cards at the banks I plan on applying for business funding at. The second thing, and this is very, very, very important, is you need to make sure that your company is positioned correctly. Now, banks, whenever you're applying, literally your company name and your industry code is very, very important, because banks have two buckets. They have the low risk business bucket and they have the high risk business bucket. Now, if your name suggests that you're high risk and they put you in that bucket, there's a good chance that you're just simply going to get denied for the credit card. But even if you aren't denied, which sometimes can be worse, you could get approved for a very small limit just based on how you look. Like, for instance, if you have, let's say that your company name is Elite Global Properties and you're a real estate consultant, just because the fact you have properties in the name suggests to them that you could be high risk, and they will immediately put you in that bucket. Even though you're technically a consulting company and you're not a real estate holding company, they could put you in that bucket of high risk just because you have properties in the name. A better name would literally be Elite Global Ventures, Elite Global Consulting, even if it was Elite Global Holdings or something. If you just need to have your business name very, very broad so you get put into the low risk bucket. The way banks look at businesses is they try to determine, their algorithm tries to determine how risky they could be, or if they're holding on to a bunch of liabilities. So like, if they think someone is a real estate investor and they're going to take that 100K or 50K card and they're going to immediately shove it into real estate, they know that real estate, or let's say that maybe you have Elite Global Crypto or Elite Crypto Holdings, if they think that you're going to take that card and you're going to put it into something that could potentially go sideways, and now you don't have the money to pay back the card, they're trying to avoid that at all costs. So whenever they see it's potentially a construction business, real estate, crypto, if they think, or the algorithm thinks it could be risky, they're going to put you in that high risk bucket, and it's either going to be denied or you're going to get a low approval. You want to have a very bland, broad name that doesn't really suggest anything, and it looks like a low risk business. This is actually very, very important. I've had people with perfect credit scores, 850, absolutely perfect, and they got approved for very, very tiny amounts because their company name suggested that they were they were risky. And one point I wanted to make real fast while I'm thinking on it is I actually have two different stories for you of how important optimizing the personal credit score is, and then also the company name. Um, the first story I have is I actually recently worked with a client and I consulted this other person that she didn't actually become a client. I just consulted with her. Um, this business was doing $0 in revenue. So we'll call it company A was doing $0 in revenue and company B was doing 2.2 million a year in revenue. The difference is between the two is company A had a very high credit score, 800 plus. They had exactly what you were looking for. They had 6 personal credit cards, a home loan, an auto loan, student loans. Like their report was just very, very strong. But company B, on the other hand, had negative items, late payments, like collections notices, like not very good. So her score was closer to that upper 500 some range, lower 600 range. Whenever we So I took company A through my full funding cycle. I just consulted with company B because she wasn't an ideal client. I tried to refer her to some credit repair, but she wanted to just go ahead and rock funding and run through it because she had strong revenue. They The results were honestly super crazy. So once everything was concluded, company A had secured 300 grand in 0% interest business funding. Now, think about this. Company A had $0 in revenue, had not generated $1 yet, but had $300,000 to now use to grow their business. Absolutely crazy. That was huge. Now, company B, on the other hand, even though she had 2.2 million in revenue, we were not able to get her a single 10K approval. Well, I don't want to say I just more or less told her what banks I would apply for, and she kind of just ran and did it. So I'm sure there could have been other factors to that. But at the end of the day, even with providing financial documents, she was not able to get even a 10K approval because they value the credit report so much. That's why optimizing the credit report is step number one for me, and I would make sure that that is dialed before I'd go for business funding. Now, the story I have for the second one, I'm actually going to save that one because it's more related to step number 3, but we'll get to that story in a second. But so the company name, very, very important. You want it to be broad. You don't want it to suggest anything high risk. Now, secondary to that is also your industry code. Whenever they are looking up your company, they will look at your industry code. So with that, your industry code, or also it's your NAICS code, NAICS. If it also suggests something risky, that can put you in a high risk bucket at the time of applying. Because a lot of times when you're applying, they're running everything through the algorithm. So it's not even like so much it's a real person reviewing this. 90% of the time it's an algorithm, and you need to give the algorithm what it wants. So if it looks and it's like, okay, so I see elite global ventures, not high risk, put it in the low risk bucket, but then they come down lower and your industry code suggests that you are in the real estate holdings, like that's what the code is, it will all now put you in the high risk bucket due to the industry code. So you also want to make sure that your company name is broad. And then when you go down to your industry code, make sure that it is consulting. Anything like that is very, very, I almost recommend everyone puts their industry code as consulting just because it suggests low risk and it works out very, very, very well. So just because I've rambled a lot, you want to make sure your industry code or your company name is bland, Elite Global Ventures. And then when you come down to the industry code, make sure it suggests something. It could be just in management consulting, anything like that works out very, very well. The third thing is you need to know what the algorithms want in terms to revenue and income on the applications, because if you put too high of revenue on an application, it's going to result in a financial review because you just simply put a little bit too high of revenue. And on the flip side, if you put too low of revenue, company revenue on an application, it's going to get either a super small approval or also could be just simply denied because they're not seeing enough revenue to want to give you a super high credit line. And the tricky part about this is each bank is different. Like I may go apply for funding at American Express, and I know that if I'm applying for funding at American Express, I can't put revenue higher than 500 because if you put revenue above 500,000, it could go into financial review. On the flip side, if I'm applying for funding at Chase, I might put funding as high as, or I may put the revenue as high as 1.7 million a year, even though the company's not producing anything near that. Maybe it's not even producing money at all, but I will put that its predicted revenue is 1.7 million. But so you have to make sure that you understand what the algorithms each bank want, because if you put too high or too low, it could end up bad in either scenario. So you have to find that sweet spot of where you're just high enough for a high approval, but you don't trigger financial review. And I will say it took me a long time to figure this out. Hundreds of applications, millions in 0% credit funded for me to really figure out what banks like, what numbers work for each bank essentially. And the story I have with this is I actually had a friend back in the day, probably it was about a couple years ago, a year and a half. He was getting ready to go through funding with me. We got everything set up. Awesome. Like he had the credit score. He had everything. We were about to rock funding, but he wanted to believe. He read a couple books, read a couple blogs, and thought he knew everything he needed to know about the funding world. So he's like, you know what, dude? Like, I don't really want to do this together. I think I'm just going to go ahead and do this by myself. And I was like, I mean, that's fine, dude, but there's a lot of little things here that you don't know, and it could result in denials or financial review. And he's like, oh, no, I'm just going to do it. I'm like, all right, cool. That's fine. Well, when he came back to me, so he had read very broad information on getting 0% funding, but he didn't know everything about the algorithms and what's too high and too low of revenue. So when he came back to me 3 months later, what ended up happening was he went to the first two banks, and when he was applying for the 0% cards, he had put too low of revenue on both applications. So mind you, at this bank, which I believe it was Chase, I normally would have gotten him, if he would have done this through me, we would have gotten at least 85K between two cards at Chase. Because he went out by himself, he only got 3K on the first one, he got 3K on the second card, and whenever he went to apply for the third card at a different bank, I actually can't remember which bank it was, he put way too high of revenue because he'd gotten those low approvals. He thought, okay, well, I'll jack up the revenue and I'll get the approval based off of that. Well, he jacked up his revenue, and whenever he jacked up his revenue, it went into financial review. And then after he, obviously didn't get approved because he didn't have the financials to prove, he ended up just giving up. And then when he came back to me, he went 2 for 3 on cards. 2 approved, 1 denied, and he only ended up with 6K. Whereas if he would have worked with me between those 3 cards, I 100% would have had him 110K plus. So he taxed himself by almost 100K by trying to just run out and do it by himself. That's why it's very, very important to know your numbers, which I am going to share numbers with you. And what I have found has worked very, very well at banks when I get to the bank list and the 3 banks I would apply for if I was going from 0 to 150K as quickly as possible. So very, very important. You have to know the revenue and what you can put at these banks. The fourth step I would take is I would get on Google, I'd get on LinkedIn, and I would find a very, very good business relationship manager at some of these banks. Now, not all banks need a business relationship manager. For instance, American Express, you do not need to have a business relationship manager. You can just apply online. But in most cases, most of the banks that I apply for funding with, like Chase, US Bank, and a lot of additional banks, I will use a business relationship manager because the approvals tend to be sometimes 100% higher when you use a business relationship manager. And if you're unfamiliar with what a business relationship manager is, that's a mouthful, is they're essentially just the middlemen. They are higher ups at the bank, and they work specifically with businesses and help us get approved for credit products, because when we get approved for a credit product, a bank account, and all these additional things, they will get compensated. So they work hard to get you approved for stuff. Like when you work with a business relationship manager, I mean, they genuinely really want to know you, your business, and they want to see you get approved, because when you get approved, they're going to get, well, one, I just think it makes them feel good getting a business the money that they need. And then they're also going to get a little piece of the pie when they get approved from the bank. So they really negotiate on your behalf with the bank. So I would find myself stepping over for a good business relationship manager at each bank that I want to apply for. That has 100% been my bread and butter. The number one thing is always going to be optimizing your credit score, because the more comparable credit lines you have, you're going to have a higher chance of getting approved. But getting a good business relationship manager at each bank that you plan on applying for is very, very, very important. Well, that's the 4 steps I would take. Now it's time to get into the fun stuff, which is, okay, now that I have everything that I need and I'm ready to run applications, what banks would I apply for? So bank number 1 is going to be, as you probably guessed, because I've talked about it like 4 times now, American Express. American Express is super, super reliable bank for me. Like I said, the 3 banks that I'm mentioning, as far as I know, you can apply for, in any state within the US, you can apply for credit at these banks. So the first bank is American Express. I have found that if you have above 720 plus, you are most likely going to get approved for them. If you have, also the next awesome thing with American Express is, like I said, you don't need a business relationship manager. You don't need to go through a middleman to get approved. You can just apply for American Express online. And I think one time I've used a business relationship manager at an American Express, but I just always prefer, for myself, for clients, we just run the applications online. So that's one super big perk with them. Now, a key with American Express that may not be as true at other banks is, if you already have a personal credit card with them, there is a good chance you're going to get approved for more funding, because they like to see that you have a prior relationship with them before applying. Now, I have ran many applications at American Express without that personal relationship, and it's worked out nice. Like we've gotten approved. But I've noticed that whenever someone has a personal relationship with them, specifically a personal credit card with them before applying, the limits seem to be a little bit higher, and it seems like a smoother process. So if you can get that personal credit card with American Express, or if you already have one, that's huge. And that's exactly why before I would apply for American Express, I personally would have already had a personal credit card with them. What's also awesome with American Express is, whenever you run an application at banks, most of the time, 90% of the time, they're going to put a hard inquiry on your credit report. Well, American Express will actually only ever put one inquiry on your report. And after that, they will pull your credit, but they'll do what's called a soft pull, which actually does not put an inquiry on your report. So if you applied for a personal credit card with American Express, let's say 3 months ago, and now you're applying for business funding with them, all of the applications that you apply for is just going to be a soft pull. They're actually not going to put an additional hard inquiry on your credit report. So it's really, really cool. You can essentially get hit with an inquiry one time, which 90% of the time they're going to pull Experian. And every application after that, they're just going to do soft pull. And so that's why I really, really like American Express too. Now let's talk. I've promised that as we talk about banks, I will also recommend cards. Now note, I don't know when you're seeing this video. If you're seeing this video now, these are the cards that I'm currently applying for, but note that what cards I apply for at banks changes frequently. So these are just the cards that I currently would apply for and the data points that I would use. Once again, the data points will also change. And by data points, I mean what you're stating as revenue and what you're stating as income. The first card that I would apply for is the American Express Blue Business Plus. This card is 0% for 12 months. And whenever I would be applying for this card, I would put, right now as it stands, I usually put somewhere between 400,000 and 500,000 as stated revenue. If your company is doing 750 grand a year in revenue, I would put 750 grand. But if you are doing 50, 100, 150, 200 grand a year, I would put somewhere between 400 to 500K in revenue on the application for the best chance of a higher approval. Now, when it comes to approvals, if you already have a personal credit card with them, I see approvals anywhere between 15K to 25K on the Blue Business Plus. If you don't have a relationship with American Express, it's usually around 10 to 15K on this card. So the strategy here is you apply for the Blue Business Plus, and if that application is denied, you're going to stop right there. You're going to move on to the next bank, because obviously American Express did not like something that you put on the application. They didn't like something on your credit report. There's something they're not liking too well. So if you get denied for the Blue Business Plus, I would stop there. If you get approved for the Blue Business Plus, I would now apply for the Amex Blue Business Cash. Now, the Blue Business Cash is 0% as well for 12 months. Yes, for 12 months. And it's actually a very, very similar card to the Blue Business Plus. I see limits if you have already a personal credit card with them. I see limits between 15 and 25K if you do not have a personal credit card with American Express. It's usually around that 10 to 15K range. And also, like, literally everything with the Blue Business Cash is the same as the Plus, meaning if you get, let's say you get approved for the Plus and then you get denied for the Blue Business Cash, I would at that point stop. American Express has said, nope, we wanted to give you the one card, we don't want to give you any more, let's stop there. I've rarely ever had this happen, but if for some reason it does, I would stop right there. Don't move on to the next card. Now, if you are approved for the Blue Business Cash, this is why I like American Express. You can knock out cards one after the other. If you are approved for the Blue Business Cash, I would then apply for the Amex Business Gold. Now, one thing to note about the Gold is it is not 0%. It is what's known as, and it does not have a credit limit. It's what's known as a charge card. So they will give you some preset limit. So when you first get the card, it will say on there, when you look, so where most cards would show the credit limit, it will just say it says no preset spending limit. And what that means is it expands with your spending. So if you use the Blue or the Business Gold, and let's say you spend 8K on it one month and pay it down, the next month they'll give you access to 15 to 20K in spending. And let's say that you max the card out that month and pay it down. The next month they'll give you access to 30, 35K. So you can see it expands with your spending. And like, I know some people who spend 500K a month on that one card because they use it a lot for their ads and they pay it down. So, I mean, if you're using the Business Gold, it expands with your spending. So, I mean, you can take that card to about just whatever spending amount you want, but just note it's not 0%. And if you do hold a balance month after month after month, you are going to pay interest on it. So that's something to keep in mind. One cool thing about the Business Gold, and this is what I like about it, is it gets 4 points per $1 spent on food. And it also gets 4 points per dollar spent on ads. So if you're spending 5K a month on ads, you're going to be getting 20,000 points a month by just using this card on your ads. And 20,000 Amex points, that would be, at the end of the year, 240,000 points if you were just using this card every month on your ads. In this case, if you're spending 5K a month, you're going to get 240,000 points at the end of the year, and 240,000 points will get you about 5 nights in an overwater villa in the Maldives, which is normally like a 20 to 30K vacation. And this is just something you're going to get as a byproduct by using this card for your ads. So that's why as the third card from American Express, I always do the Business Gold because it is very, very, very beneficial card for business owners. If you do not want the business gold, you also can use the Amex Business Platinum as your third card in the sequence at American Express. But if I'm starting from zero, I want to get up to 150K as quickly as possible. I always apply, and I always take clients through this. We always hit American Express first, always, because you can get these 3 cards pretty much immediately. You can apply online, and I see usually between 30 to 50K in total credit after applying for American Express, which just gets you rolling. Now the second bank, which is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and is I would say, I mean, they give the highest limits out of any bank, which some of you probably would have guessed this, Chase. Chase is a behemoth when it comes to giving out high limit business credit cards. I mean, I've gotten people as high as 75K on one single card with Chase. They are 100% the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So with Chase, the strategy is a little bit different. I still see that if you have a 720 plus, there's a great chance you're going to get approved pretty easily with Chase. If you have, I mean, the closer you are to 750, the better, but I've gotten plenty of results at 720 plus. The difference is with American Express, I said you can apply online, and that's fine. When you're applying at Chase, you do need to go through a business relationship manager. When you apply online with Chase, I've seen people get, 20K per card, 15K, or somewhere around there. So like you can get around, 30, 40K if you apply online, which not bad, 30, 40K, 0%. But when you apply through a business relationship manager, I see limits very, 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 very consistently between 85K and 100K. So, I mean, that's, over 100% increase in credit limits by simply just using a business relationship manager. So when applying for Chase, you need to use a business relationship manager. I always do, because the limits are significantly higher in most cases. Now, let's see how the first card. Now, you don't have to follow through this sequence. I know people who do it differently and it works out for them. And I'm sure if you did it differently, it would work out for you. But I'm just going to show you exactly my process and what has worked for me and has worked for tons and tons and tons of clients. I always first you set up. So with American Express, you do not need to have a business bank account. You can literally just apply and, a lot of times get approved. With Chase, it's a tiny bit different. You need to have a business bank account set up. And it makes a lot of sense. And usually the best results happen when you can drop cash into the account prior to applying. So you could 100% apply through a business relationship manager, skip setting up the bank account. And I have seen people do it. The problem is I haven't seen it a lot with people just applying for Chase without setting up the business bank account and dropping cash. So I don't want to suggest something that I haven't seen a lot of times. I like consistency. I like data. And from what I've seen, I've done, the data I have suggests setting up a bank account is the best way to go about it. So, obviously setting up the business bank account, not too hard. But what I run into, is a lot of people don't have the liquid capital, which I didn't either at first, to drop into the business bank account. Because I see that you should drop, ideally, if you could put 10K plus in the bank account prior to application, that is very, very beneficial. But a lot of people don't have, just 10K sitting around to drop into a Chase account. If you do not have the liquid capital to put into the bank account, I would recommend getting a personal loan. I've done this many, many times. I've done this twice for myself in the past. But essentially all you do is just apply for a personal loan. Once you get the loan proceeds, I set up the Chase Business Bank account. I drop the cash into the account. And then if you don't want that, if you don't want that personal loan on your credit report, whenever you get done applying for Chase, you can just take the 0% credit and then you can pay off the personal loan. If you don't have the liquid cash to put into the account already, then it makes a lot of sense to just get a personal loan, take the loan proceeds, put it in the bank account prior to application. Like I said, I've done this twice and it worked out very, very well for me. So to kind of recap and run through everything, with Chase, you're going to find yourself a nice business relationship manager. When I say nice, I just mean someone who's good. You're going to set up the business bank account. You're going to drop the 10K plus into the business bank account. And after that money has settled, meaning it's not pending anymore, as soon as that money is settled, you're going to apply you're going to contact the business relationship manager, have them send you the application, and then you're going to apply for I don't know if you can see that, the Chase Business Unlimited. Now, like I said, you could do this different ways. I just prefer this card. It's 0% for 12 months. It usually has a fairly large sign-up bonus, which is cool. And when it comes to data points of what you're going to put on the application, Chase is tricky because it's based off of how old your entity is. If your LLC is 2 months old, you're going to be putting significantly different revenue. You may be only putting $700K, $800K on the application. But if you have a company, or if your LLC is 5 years old that you're applying with, you can put higher revenue. You can put 1.7, 1.8, 1.9 million in revenue, even like your company could be making $0. I've done this plenty of times, and you put 1.8, 1.9 million or so in revenue, and it works out very, very well because they want to see that your company is growing. So if your company is 5 years old and you put the same data points that you did at American Express, so if you put 450K at Chase, but you're hoping to get, closer to 80K, to 100K in 0% credit limits, it's just not going to work out well. And also, if you're only at 450K after 5 years, it may suggest that your growth is slow. You want to make it look like your company's growing crazy fast. And when you get this funding, you're just going to immediately put it into the company, and it's just going to explode. It's going to grow. It's going to grow even faster now. That's what I'm trying to kind of get at whenever I'm applying for funding with Chase. So if your company is fairly new, your revenue is probably going to be closer to like 700, 800K stated on the application. And if your company is older, then it would be beneficial to put something above 1.5 million in revenue. Now, this one with American Express, it's pretty much immediate. You apply, you're going to get an instant decision. Now, when applying through a relationship manager at Chase, it's usually going to take 7 to 10 business days to hear something back. So when you apply for the Business Unlimited, you're going to have to wait at this point for, the 7 to 10 days to wait to hear the approval. If the approval comes through, that's the green light to move on to card number 2. If the denial comes through, then you need to go back to the drawing board and you need to see, okay, what happened here? Why isn't Chase happy? Because like I said, if you get a denial on the first card, that means the bank didn't like either something you put on the application or it's something on your credit report they're not liking it too much. Now, if you get denied, that doesn't always mean that you should, run away and just immediately stop pursuing that card. I have many times applied for a Chase card. It went into the decline status. I called the credit card reconsideration line at Chase, and after multiple calls, 5 plus 5, 6, 7 calls, I was able to overturn the decline into being approved. Now that can be a little bit tedious, strenuous, but I mean, at the end of the day, if it takes you, 4 hours of total time on the phone with Chase to overturn that approval, or overturn the, decline into an approval, that might be worth it. So you don't need to, I would call the bank at a minimum 3 times after a decline to try to push that approval through. It is different. I don't necessarily call American Express and try to overturn it, but with Chase, they have a really, really good underwriting team and they're very reasonable. So if you get declined, call them, see if you can get it overturned. But if it doesn't seem like they're going to overturn it, then that means you just need to move on. But let's say best case scenario, I will say that I do not have a lot of, when I'm using this strategy that I'm explaining right now, I do not see a lot of declines. I see a ton of approval. So we apply for the first card, we put everything correct, 7 days later, we get the approval. At the time you get the approval, you need to reach back out to your relationship manager, tell them that you got the approval, and now that you have the approval on the first one, you're going to immediately apply for the second one. Now, the second one, it's important. Actually, I better mention so the second one is actually the Chase Ink Cash currently. Like I said, it may change, but currently the second card I apply for is the Ink Cash. The first one is the Business Unlimited. Now, a strategy that has worked very, very well for me is I apply for the Business Unlimited and I request a $50K credit limit. When I apply for, after that approval comes through and I apply for the Chase Ink Cash, at that time, when I apply for that card, I put the same data points. If I put set 1.7 million on the first application, you need to keep the data points very similar. Put that on the second application. Put your 1.7 million as revenue. But the difference is, instead of requesting a 50K credit limit, I only request a 35K credit limit. I have had people who have applied for 50 and 50 on first, the two, and they got 100K in approved funding. But I see almost 100% of the time a double approval when I do 50K and 35K. So I know that's 15K less than if you requested 50 on both cards, but I would rather take the guaranteed 85 than I would try to mess around and, potentially get denied on the second card trying to shoot for 100. I will take that 15K less and get the guaranteed. But that is what I would recommend with Chase. I'm trying to think if there's any other points. I'm trying to keep this as raw and real as I can for you. As you can see, this is unedited. I'm thinking this all through as I go to make sure I'm giving you every single piece of value that you need. So yeah, you apply for the Business Unlimited 50K limit, the Ink Cash 35K, and at this point in the funding round, you should be like, if I was going from 0 to 150,000 as quickly as possible, in most cases, after American Express and after applying for Chase, I will now be somewhere in the ballpark of 115K to 125K. So we're very, very close to that 150, and I just need one more bank to tip it over. So like I said, every bank I'm mentioning here, as far as I know, and as the time of this recording, they serve every state in the U.S. So that's exactly why I always recommend these banks, because it applies to every online business owner. You don't have to just be an online business owner. That's just what I own as an online business. And those are the people that I serve, and those are the people that I get funding for. So I know them the best. So every single online business owner should be able to apply for these three banks. But the third bank on the list is U.S. Bank. Now, U.S. Bank is going to be actually very, very similar to Chase. I see 720 plus, good chance you're going to get approved, and you also will need to get a business relationship manager. You can apply online, but when you apply online with US Bank, they discount you big time in credit limits. I see a lot of people apply online and get a 3K credit limit on a card that should be 25K. You certainly can apply online for US Bank, but in my opinion, it's just not worth the tax you're going to pay. Not actual taxes, but if you apply online and get 3K, or if you apply through a business relationship manager and you get 25, to me, it's a no-brainer. Just go through the business relationship manager, and that is exactly what I did, and that is exactly what I do for clients. So I can only really ever suggest things that I do, and that's exactly what I do. I go through a business relationship manager because I want to ensure the highest approval possible. Now, here is it's a little bit different from Chase. What is all the same is you're going to set up a business bank. You're going to talk to a business relationship manager. You're going to set up a business bank account. You're going to now put the money that you had in the bank account at Chase. I would wire that money or just transfer that money over to the bank account at US Bank. As soon as that money settles in the US Bank account, hop on the phone with your business relationship manager, and you're going to run the applications. Now, here is where it is going to be a tiny bit different. Now, when it comes to revenue, it's fairly similar. I usually consistently will put anywhere between 600K to 900K in revenue, no matter how old the company is. You probably could get away with higher revenue at US Bank, but I like to get guaranteed approvals. So if I'm trying to get that guaranteed approval for myself or for a client, I would put somewhere between the ballpark of 600K in revenue and 900K in revenue on the application. Now, the number is just going to determine or change based on how old your company is. And once again, if your company is 3 months old, you're going to put different revenue than someone who has a 5-year-old company, because their company's been technically, around longer. So they need to put higher revenue. And as always, if you actually have higher revenue, put that real number. If you're making 1.3 million a year in revenue, put 1.3 million a year on your application, because even if they ask for your financials, you have the financials to prove. Trying to get this no proof of income approval, that is only important if you don't have the income to prove. If you have the income to prove, then you don't have to worry about it, but you still have to make sure that, of course, you have an optimized credit score. So the way I would set up the business bank account, I would drop the money from Chase into the US bank account. Once that money's settled, I hop on the phone with the business relationship manager. And instead of like Chase, so Chase, we did one card, waited for the approval, then applied for the second card. With US Bank, it is a little bit different. So what we're going to do is actually apply for, when we hop on the phone with the business relationship manager, we're going to apply for the US Bank Triple Cash Rewards and also the US Bank Business Platinum. I actually do not have a Business Platinum right here next to me, so I can only show you the Triple Cash Rewards. So to recap, you hop on the phone with the business relationship manager, you tell them that you would like to apply for the US Bank Triple Cash and the US Bank Business Platinum at the same time, and you request 25K limits on each of those two cards. I've never had a business relationship manager say, well, no, you need to wait for one approval. Like they never say that. And that's not how they sound either. That's just my best Karen reaction, I guess. You need to apply for both of those at the same time, because I've noticed that when you apply for them at the same time, that is the best chance for a double approval. When you apply for one, wait to get approved, and then apply for a second, they always give the same objection. Well, we just gave you a 25K approval, and we don't really see a need for you to have it. Like, it's always the same song and dance. So I recommend you apply for both cards at one time. You apply for 25K limits on each one. And what I notice is that almost always, as the time of this recording, we will get 25 or 23K on the US Bank Triple Cash, and then on the US Bank Business Platinum, it's almost always a 10K approval. So I almost always land at 33K at US Bank, which is perfectly fine, because if our goal, which the goal of this video is, I'm starting from scratch, I need to get to 150 as quickly as I can. If that is the goal, then we got our 30K to 50K at American Express. We got our 85K or 100K at Chase. And then now that we have this, well, like I said, it could easily change, but as of the time of this recording, it's usually around 30K ish. And then we get our 30K at US Bank. And with that puts us that would put us somewhere in the ballpark of like 150 to 160, 170 range. And then this is 3 banks. Depending on what state you live in, there are many other banks that you could apply for and applications that you can hit. And that's how, like the client I mentioned earlier, we got him to 300K. He lived in a very, very good state to get funding, and there were a lot of other banks. These are just 3 banks I mentioned. There are hundreds of banks. And a lot of times, there will be a really, really good funding bank that only serves like 10 states. And if you live in one of those states, like that could be another easy, I mentioned right now we're sitting between 150 and 170K. The way I got to 400K is I just hit a bunch of these other banks that apply to my state. And if you just stack these banks on top of each other, then you can get yourself very, very close to $250,000. Like even now that I'm coming up on $500,000. and 0% business credit, because you can also get funding on different entities. But that's what I recommend. The last thing I'm going to mention, because I forgot to say this bank by bank, it's important to know what credit bureaus the banks that you're applying for are going to pull. I know from experience, American Express is going to pull Experian. Chase, a lot of times, will pull Experian and TransUnion. And most of the time, US Bank will pull TransUnion. So when I'm thinking about what banks I'm going to apply for next, I just look at how many inquiries I have. So if you think about what I just said, that would mean if American Express pulls Experian, that would be one inquiry. And then Chase will actually pull your credit twice when you apply for the two cards. So they'll pull Experian and TransUnion twice. So that would mean we now have 3 inquiries on Experian and 2 on TransUnion. And then US Bank will pull TransUnion one time. So that would make it three inquiries on Experian, and now you have 3 inquiries on TransUnion. So if I was going to suggest that someone got funding, like after we applied for these 3 banks, if I was going to continue on getting business credit, I would now think, okay, and I would look at my list and I would look at the data and I would find out what bank in my area or in my state pulls Equifax, because we have inquiries on Experian and we have inquiries on TransUnion. So now I would think, okay, well, what banks are going to pull Equifax? Because Equifax, if a bank only pulls Equifax, they can't see the other inquiries. They can only see that you have none on Equifax. So I would now apply for banks that are going to pull Equifax, because that's going to give me the best chance of more approvals. And then you just have to hit those banks strategically like that. And then that's how you can find yourself up at a way higher level, like 250K, 300K, and then up, and above. But yeah, so just to recap, if I was going from 0 to 150K as quickly as I possibly could, I would 150K in 0% business credit. I would go for, or I would, step number 1 is I'd optimize my credit report. Absolutely optimize my credit report. Second, I would make sure my company name and my industry code rock solid in a low risk bucket. Thirdly, I would make sure that I understood what to put on the applications at each bank, so I knew what was going to give me a high approval without financial review and without getting a low limit. The fourth thing is I would find myself a really, really good relationship manager at the banks that you need one. And then after I really solved those 4 steps and I walked all the way through them, I would now start applying and start my funding round, which would start with American Express. That would, Chase would follow American Express. And then thirdly, I would apply for US Bank. And then if I wanted additional funding after that, I would figure out what banks serve my state and and I would look at how many inquiries I have in my credit report, and whatever bank I apply for would be determined off of where I have open inquiries, which in this case would be Equifax doesn't have inquiries on it. So, but yeah, those are the exact steps I would take. Those are the steps that I take clients through. I know this is I'm long-winded. I probably rambled a lot, but that's exactly step by step how I'd get to 150K as quickly as humanly possible. But that's all I got for you guys, and I hope to see you in the next one.